This is IBM Museum, and quite a stack of systems behind me on the bench. This is all for trying to get a zip drive to work with my maxed out Model 30. Just adding another drive to it. And I've gone through, I'll get turned around a moment and kind of explain what the components are to this and what I've been testing on. So let me get the internal webcam off, and that way I know I have the full field of view. I'm not going to go through and necessarily be able to bring anything up to the camcorder, but this is a good view of what I've got. And so on the bottom here, I've got my so-called Max Model 30. That's got the SCSI adapter in it. So it's running the 1 gigabyte drive. It also, that SCSI adapter runs the external CD-ROM. And then I've got the 4869 adapter in there as well. This is a 360 KB external drive. And for this, I've got the two zip drives here are actually both connected to this Max Model 30. The lower one is actually a SCSI model. It is after the CD-ROM. It has of course, its own SCSI ID, and as we'll see when I power the system up in a moment, it actually recognizes that. But you have to have a driver to run the zip drive. And then on top here, this is actually the zip drive that's a parallel port model of the zip drive, and that is actually connected up to the parallel port of this maxed Model 30 as well. Now, it's easy for me to go through and load the drivers. I've got many of these CDs that are like versions 4 and 5. It's going to be versions 5 and 6 of the iOmega drivers. And I went through, and it would go through and just report that it was going to assign a drive letter to the zip drive with these later version 5 and version 6 drivers. And it would fail on that. And so I thought, well, I've got the zip driver, the guest exe that I went through when I worked with this Model 30 286 just some previous videos ago. Ended up commenting that out because, I mean, I didn't have a zip drive out. Clearly, it was intended for the parallel port model. And I've gone through and actually did some testing and had this parallel port version connected up to the Model 3286, and it worked perfectly fine. And it's version 4.2 of the guest.exe zip driver on this model. And so I went through, I even took the driver off of the system, or copied it over to Diskette and moved it over to the Max Model 30, and still it doesn't run. Now I'm going to bring up the PalmDOS utility here in a moment. I'll actually bring up the page on screen because my Max Model 30 does have an NEC V30 CPU in it. And in fact, it's probably a real good time to go through and bring up that page. So this is the palmZIP driver page. And I'll give a link in the video description to this as well, because it goes through and it talks about, and I've heard about this running on more minimal systems. It's designed to run on a comparably low-end system. Now, it only goes through and works with the parallel port model of the zip drive. So that SCSI zip drive, it's kind of out of the picture. I want to still kind of investigate with the Omega drivers and see if I can get something working on that front. But at the very top, it talks about the handicaps of the Omega driver, that it requires DOS 4.x or later, and that is not an issue with mine, with my Maxmol 30. I've got MS-DOS 6.22 on it, and does not run on an 8086 processor, which is the original CPU of the PS2 Mol 25 and Mol 30, like I have here. But we've got that in parens. It's got requires at least an 80, 186, or NEC V.20 CPU. Now the V.20, the V20 CPU is a direct swap for an 8088. And then the V30 is a direct swap for the 8086 processor. And that's what I've done on this Maxmol 30 that's on the bench behind me. So for all that, the iOmega drivers, should work on my system. It talks about high memory consumption and long delay during boot process. And that's using the guest exe file, the driver, to go through and run that, assign a drive letter and get that parallel port zip drive set up for the system. And so when I run it, it hangs. In fact, going through it, typically you have to go through even a power cycle to get back. And I've gone through and I've done the wait on the Mol 3286. Everything that's identical runs just fine on that. And the only real difference, I mean, there's a little bit of difference in the architecture, but the main difference is that CPU. And so I've got to just find if I've not got an old enough version of that guest exe or something else. But I'm going to go through, and I've already put in an order for the palmZIP driver, because I anticipate using that on the PC convertible. There's a what they call a slice, or a little add-on IO port assembly to the back of the convertible that has both a parallel port and serial port. And I anticipate connecting that slice and running it on the convertible, and that'll even give a component of effectively a hard drive, 100 megabyte hard drive or storage medium for the PC convertible. Granted, I should be able to get that to work, but we'll find out. Now, and of course, on that, I have to have all the driver effectively on a 720 KB diskette that I can boot from, and then load that driver to where it recognizes, because the PC convertible doesn't have any effective hard drive to it. It just has the 2 diskette drives of 720 KB each. So the palmZIP is a nice little small driver, and there is a demo version I've downloaded. We'll go through that in a moment. I haven't actually set it up on the Mol 30. I've just been running some initial test on the parallel port and have some interesting things. I'll go through. We're going to get the Maxmol 30 powered up, get a little bit more disk wide. I do have even that Mol 3026 that's on top of it, that's open face right now. I do have that powered up on the connected up to that background monitor, even though I have my more modern system connected to it. So let's go through, turn off the browser capture. Let's get over to the video capture as this Mol 30 boots up. And even probably, let me go through that again, just to kind of show, because it does detect everything. I'll just do a warm boot in this case. And there it loads. There's the transfer driver for the SCSI adapter, and it's going through. It finds, of course, one SCSI adapter, and then it goes through. It finds the CD-ROM, and it's also for that device 5, that direct access media device, saying removable media. That is actually the SCSI zip drive that effectively is cut out of the picture. We're going to focus on getting this parallel port version up on top of the stack going. And I'm just doing this to get the zip drive set up because I've got some contents on those zip disks. It's real easy to move between systems. I could go through and I could burn a CD, a CD recordable on a more modern system too, and move files to it and read it from that CD-ROM drive. But, it's a Maximal theory. Let's get as many drives as we can get connected to it. So the first thing I did, and I've got this over to the files over to a directory called palmZIP. And I've copied over the primary, even though there's some other files that are included with the package. And this is just the demo version. As I say, I've gone through and I've ordered the full palmZIP version. I'm interested in paying the author for that. It's €8 for the program, because I anticipate using this. I anticipate needing this. So within this directory, there is I've copied over this lpttest.com, and that's for checking if the port is bidirectional capable. And the PS2s went through and they did introduce a bidirectional parallel port with these systems. And so that kind of interests me in getting that faster method of the way of accessing the parallel port zip drive, even though I won't be able to use it on the PC convertible and things like that. That'll have to operate in that so-called nibble mode. And then I have the palmzip.sys driver that I have not loaded in my config sys file yet to go through and test. But I thought I wanted to go through and to test the parallel port, just because this file is included, this little program utility to go through and test the capabilities of the parallel port. And it comes back, the parallel port info utility, it has the parallel port LPT1, and it gives the IO port address 0378. That's all standard. The readback after output is listed as okay, and then its bidirectional capability is listed as failed. And that really kind of confused me, because I thought, the PS2s, all of them should have that bidirectional port capability. And I'll probably end up having to go through and show that and talk about that IO port 65 hex again, because there's a ability to set the mode of the parallel port within that, although it's not really explanatory as far as what's bidirectional mode and what is the regular mode on that parallel port. Now, for the listing below that, it talks about LPT4 and that port address, that 9FC0. That's just a false reading of the extended BIOS data area. Normally that spot, since it would be uncommon that you'd have a port as high as LPT4. It's saying you have 3 parallel ports already on the system, and you want to add a 4th parallel port. And for the standard PC out there, that just was not a condition that was countered, and IBM went through and used that to denote where the extended BIOS data area is on the system, the segment of memory space that extended BIOS data area is. So that is a as it says, unusual port address, it should be able to identify that that is its extended BIOS data area. But it's going through and checking that LPT4, just doing a blind check as it is. Maybe this is no parallel port at all, which is correct. And then it talks about the, it's interesting that it talks about the bidirectional test may be wrong. It says, okay, but floating point lines or port in use. I hope it's not going through and trying to test that address necessarily, which is, I think that's even out of the range of an IO port anyway. But it may be going through and testing part of that, which would really be wrong. That's not a valid parallel port on the system. It's the extended BIOS data area segment. So back to the LPT1 failing that bidirectional capabilities. As I've gone through on prior times, I've gone through that IO port viewer from the undocumented PC book. And because we're working with a Model 30, just like a Model 25, it has an IO port register 65 hex on it that it tracks for the equipment that is detected, the planar based functionality of the parallel port, the serial port, hard drive, the proprietary hard drive, or the MCGA video of the planar being active. And of course, on this system, I've got a VGA board in it, so that MCGA planar video is deactivated. The proprietary hard drive interface is disabled because I don't have a drive connected to it. I've got that SCSI adapter. So the way this comes back is for going across that row 60 until we get to that 9A, that would be IO port 65 hex, has a value of 9A hexadecimal in it. Now, I know for all that, in fact, I need to go through and show a way of what that register contents are. I've done that in prior videos. I've shown what that register looks like. Now, we can go through and we can even do the DOS debug. Also goes through and shows what the value of that is. We do like a debug, and we do an I for input, and then 65. And remember, DOS debug is natively talks in hexadecimal. It also shows that 9A value, even though that on the screen, that's really kind of the edge. That's just my video. Here, there's not really any way for me to adjust that per se. But I want to go through, and I know that register well enough, and that IO register 65 hex, it's a dynamic port. I mean, it goes through, and if you have any contents you write to that port, it's not preserved through a power cycle or a reboot. The system goes through, and when it powers up, it auto detects the equipment again and sets those default modes. Now, I was a little bit interested, and I know by just the values and my knowledge of that register, if I go through and I say out to port 65 and I say 1A, we're changing that 9, and there's actually 2 reserved bits within that register for right in the middle. But I know that high order bit is the parallel port mode. And I can list that in I'll probably can put it in the video description just to show what the contents are. But I want to go through and just experiment around changing that mode. So going through, I've written that 1A value. Certainly, if we go through and do an input of port 65, it shows that 1A setting that we've applied now. And we can do Q for quitting DOS debug. And we're actually going to go through and we're going to go back to that palmZIP directory, because we're going to go through and we're going to do that LPT test again. Okay, so on LPT1 now, and we've learned that LPT4, we're not even going to worry about that, what it says down there. But it's listing, of course, the same port address, and it's saying read back after output is failed with byte FF. I don't necessarily know what all that's about, but it says bidirectional test may be wrong, but the bidirectional capabilities, now it's saying okay. Now, the palmZIP driver, I think when it boots up, it goes through and it tests that capability anyway. And it just reacts, and you can force it one way or the other. Now, we're going to go through, and since I've got it says bidirectional now, I've got to decide even how I'm going to do this, because I may have to do. We'll see the output, and I'm looking at the possibility where I'll have to do a utility to set the parallel port in that mode for the Model 30 and the Model 25. I can just do a little basic utility that sets up that mode appropriate ahead of time, and it has to go through, and it's going to be interesting because the palmZIP driver is loaded from config sys, which runs before any later utility that would go through and change that parallel port. So who knows? That may be some other thing here. It's maybe a driver in config sys to go through and to do the same effect, or we just have to kind of see. I want to see what palmZIP will do for us. Let's go back to the root directory. We're just going to go through and we're going to edit our config sys. Okay, so there's a lot of the drivers for the CD-ROM. And in fact, I'll go through and I'm going to go down to just ultimately the bottom of this config sys file, because I'm going to go through and do a device, and we're going to do C:\/ palmZIP and \\\palmZIP dot sys. That's what the driver loaded for palmZIP is. And we're going to go Alt Fs, which saves the file. Alt F exit. Exits our editing utility. And we're going to go through and we're going to do a reboot now. Now, keep in mind with the reboot that IO port register 65 hex is going to be reset. And so we'll need to go through and, in the end, figure out how okay. and maybe this is just for the demo version that's going through and doing this. As I say, this is my first time going through, and I think it goes through and it does like a delay probably with the demo of just you go through and run it. And I wonder if E is the zip drive, because D is for my CD-ROM. Let's go through and find out. And it may have been talking about, I wonder if it's talking about the CD-ROM. I wonder if it's getting mixed up with that. Or is it 7 minutes to go before it sets up the palmZIP driver? So yeah, this is the CD-ROM based on that message that we saw before. I guess we just have to go through and wait for, let's look at D. Okay. And it didn't give us any verbose information that we're, okay, so that is the zip drive on D. And it's interesting that the CD-ROM driver was earlier in the config sys, but it went through and it put that on the E drive letter, and D being the directory for the zip drive. Now, one of the things I wanted, I mean, the goal with this was going through and to get that VB-DOS copied over as my ultimate goal with this, even though I want to get that palmZIP driver loaded and everything else. So I don't know if you have use. That 7-minute warning was really strange. I don't know if it had just a that it functions for 7 minutes and it stops or something. So we better get busy here. I mean, I can wait for when the regular version of palmZIP comes in. And here I'm getting flustered and jumping ahead. So we're going to do a VB-DOS directory. And I'm going to change directory to VB-DOS. And I'm going to say copy D VB-DOS. And I know I have enough room on this 1 gigabyte hard drive, SCSI hard drive that I have on my Maximal 30. And just that, we don't have to, we're in the directory itself. So let's go through, let's start that in motion. And I had to see for that countdown timer too. That's what I'm expecting by the notification, that it's just saying you have the use of the drive for like 7 minutes, and then that's and then it goes through and it is pulled out of memory or something else for that demo version. Some of these may be bigger files and take a little bit more time. It goes through, it looks like it's copying them in the alphabetical order organization that it has. and we can see if it's visible, we can see the access light on that top drive. The amber light being accessed. Okay, we know that our CD-ROM was E. And I want to archive these and try and work with a little bit more and find that version maybe that operates with the V30 CPU. Because I mean, I have a SCSI version of the zip drive, and from the SCSI adapter, it'd be nice to go through and not necessarily tie up the parallel port, but we can just kind of see for that. And I'll have to determine how much of the time I have this parallel port model connected to it to run it this way too. And it's going to be interesting. I mean, the Visual Basic for DOS should run. I want to run the utilities or the programs. I mean, I want to go through and do a little bit of programming from this host of this small 30, but it's going to be interesting kind of seeing that. I mean, otherwise, I think it meets the specifications and should operate that correctly, but I'd have to look at the system requirements too. Maybe could be surprised. And I've got everything else as far as the mouse and everything else connected to it, even running the mouse driver. Okay, so 87 files copied. And I think the executable is just the VB-DOS. Let's take a look. Let's see if everything operates. Do that. And that's nice. I can go through and I can work with the projects and things like that and see what it takes to run stuff now. Because this was the ultimate goal of going through and getting the zip drive, just an easy way to go through and from another system copy to a zip disk and put it to this system and copy it over, rather than using diskettes, limited diskette capacity, or writing files to that CDR and then viewing them there. But so this will be really handy too. Once I get it set up for the convertible, get the full palmZIP driver, I'll go through and put it on a diskette, and we'll see the operation from that, testing on the PC convertible as well. So there's going to be a little bit more to come with this as well. But if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and click on that like button, please. And by all means, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do that and recommend it to your friends that are interested in this sort of content too. I've got to go through and I'll figure out a way to work with that parallel port mode. I mean, the palmZIP driver loads here, but this is probably a nibble mode. And so I'll have to go through and think how I'm going to go through and handle that aspect of the driver. And I'd like to go for a bidirectional mode, or at least if it's available, if that palmZIP goes through and tests for that, to do it that way. And then, it's going to operate faster if it does that way. So You just have to stay tuned for that aspect. But this is IBM Museum. That's all I have for now. Thank you.